And welcome into another edition of the BIS podcast, broadcasting live on the Marvin Network, where our goal is to bring you updates in local technology changes and also local government updates as well. And we like to bring in a little bit of fun mixed in there. And on today's podcast, we welcome back one of our favorites, Sterling Harris. Sterling, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Josh.
Well, it's so glad. We always love having you on, Sterling. You have so much to tell. We've gone over a lot of things about interesting Texas history, and that's actually one of the topic for today's discussion is another edition of Interesting Texas History with Sterling Harris. Now, Sterling, you have had a pretty successful venture in dealing with history, and of course, we know about your time working for the General Land Office here in Texas, and the stories you kind of told about that. And today's topic, Sterling, I think is going to hit home for a lot of people. Wouldn't you say that?
Yes, I would. I think we're going to talk about the Alamo, and just, that was the greatest history event that's ever been in Texas for sure. That's changed the world. So I think this is a wonderful topic to visit today.
Absolutely, Sterling. And also on today's podcast, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. So Sterling has actually provided a video that's done by TexasHistoryTrust.org, and it kind of explains the Battle of the Alamo, or the final day, the 13th day, the siege of the Alamo. And it's a really good video, folks, that we're going to view here in just a second. Now, after the video's over, me and Sterling are going to discuss it. And both of us have already watched the video, but for everyone that's going to be seeing this for the first time, it's going to be a really kind of interesting dive into that final day, or what they call the siege, the 13th day. So, Sterling, I'm going to go ahead and let's play the video and let the fine folks tune in and kind of get out of it, hopefully, what we got out of it.
You bet. I hope so. It's very interesting.
All right, let's go ahead and roll the clip.
Day 13 of the siege, the final assault, March 6, 1836. 12 days ago, Santa Anna, with a portion of his army, about 1,500 men, arrived and lay siege to San Antonio. The Alamo's garrison, amounting to about 150 men, left their homes and headed into the Spanish mission turned fort. Santa Anna raised the flag of no quarter, signifying he intended to take no prisoners. Over the ensuing 12 days, the Mexican troops established camps closer and closer to the Alamo. William Barrett Travis wrote numerous letters to the Texas settlements asking for reinforcements, but only 32 arrived from Gonzales. About the time Travis learned that no additional help would be arriving, Santa Anna decided he wouldn't wait to siege the defenders into surrender. Instead, he would carry out an assault. The Centralist soldiers awoke at midnight on March 6th to get ready to move to their attack positions. The moon was up, but its light was diffused by clouds. It was to be a surprise dawn attack, so smoking was prohibited, and every man was ordered to move in silence. So where did each of the 4 attack columns form up? We don't exactly know, but based on what happened during the assault, historians guess that the 1st and 2nd columns waited here near the northern battery. Santa Anna was also here with his reserves. The 3rd column came together here, east of the Alamo, and the 4th here by the La Villita entrenched camp. The cavalry waited at the Alameda. In all, about 1,700 soldados were preparing themselves for battle. And there would be no artillery, since the plan was to send soldados up and over the walls on all 4 sides of the fort. Cannon blasts would jeopardize the lives of Mexican soldiers way more than they would those of the Texians inside the walls. Once at their designated attack positions, many of the Mexican soldiers laid down on the ground, their arms at hand, trying to snatch a little bit more rest before the signal was given to move. Inside the Alamo, the Texians slept, a condition upon which Santa Anna depended for his element of dawn surprise. Around 5 a.m., well before sunrise, the pre-battle tension in the Mexican columns came to a head. One soldado in the 2nd column let out a cry. Another soldado picked it up, and it spread quickly through the column. And Colonel Duque was unable to quiet the shouts. The surprise was lost, the jig was up, the time had come. To make the advance official across all the attack columns, Santa Anna ordered the bands at the North Battery to sound the calls. Toque de atención, then toque de ataque, attention and attack. As the columns were set in motion toward the Alamo, they sounded the deguello, the toque that was the auditory equivalent of the blood-red flag Santa Anna had raised upon arrival. No quarter. Thousands of feet beating the ground in unison, the shouts, the martial music, the noise of war, moving swiftly toward the Alamo roused some of the defenders from their sleep. According to Joe, the body servant of William Barrett Travis, Captain John J. Bow burst into the room where he and Travis slept, bringing word that the Mexicans were incoming. Joe reported that Travis grabbed his shotgun and called on Joe to do the same. The two men ran out into the courtyard and climbed up on the north wall. According to Joe, Travis hollered out to the men of the garrison, "Come on, boys, the Mexicans are upon us and we'll give 'em hell." What Travis and Joe likely saw was a sea of confusion and soldados trying to reach and climb the walls. Despite Santa Anna's original four-prong attack plan, the action concentrated at the north wall pretty early on. Here's how. Cose's Column 1 advanced on the northwest corner, while Duquesne's Column 2 moved directly toward the north wall. They received a blast from the Texian battery on that wall. A blast that killed or wounded a large chunk of the Toluca cazadores and even injured the column's commander, Colonel Duque. Romero's Column 3 was approaching the east wall but took fire from the Alamo's eastern batteries, so Romero maneuvered his column toward the north. As Column 2 regrouped and tried to push forward, firing at the Texians atop the walls, Cose's Column 1 was thinned out a little by friendly fire, so they swiftly pivoted around toward the west wall. According to Joe's account, Travis fired both barrels of his shotgun into the advancing soldados. Joe likewise discharged his weapon, and moments later, Travis was fatally shot. Joe then fled the scene and took refuge, maybe in Travis's quarters, maybe with the women and children in the church. Columns 2 and 3 were bunched up at the north wall, and lots went wrong here for both sides of the conflict. The north wall had been reinforced by a wooden outerwork, essentially a wall of logs constructed outside the 18th century adobe walls. Now you would think that logs would be more climbable than adobe for men equipped with axes and crowbars, right? But according to Jose Enrique de la Peña, the soldados learned only in the din of battle that the 2 axes and 2 crowbars that they had been given weren't nearly enough, and besides that, their ladders were poorly constructed. It appears that in the scrum of soldados from 2 different columns, there was a complete breakdown of command, likely owing to the fact that the men couldn't hear the shouts of their commanders. The first to climb to the top successfully were met with Texian bayonets and pistol rounds. The next wave stepped over the dead and clambered up. Of the men at the teeming north wall about 15 minutes into the battle, De La Peña wrote, "They climbed in quest of a less obscure death than that visited on them, crowded in a single mass." He painted a picture of the stall at the north wall in this way. The sharp reports of the rifles, the whistling of bullets, the groans of the wounded, the cursing of the men, the sighs and anguished cries of the dying, the arrogant harangues of the officers, the noise of the instruments of war, bewildered all and made this moment a tremendous and critical one. Meanwhile, at the opposite end of the compound, taking cover behind jacalas near the south gate, Column 4 of 125 cazadores prepared to move on the southwest corner where the 18-pounder cannon was. From Santa Anna's vantage point, up at the North Battery, all he could see were the soldados stalled in confusion at the north wall, and to him that looked like a recipe for failure. So he threw his reserves at the problem. 400 granaderos and the officers at his side were sent in to restore order. And it worked. It worked pretty well. The north wall was overrun in short order. Morales' 4th column made it over the walls at the southwest corner and killed the gunners manning the 18-pounder cannon. The largest cannon in the compound had likely been wheeled around by the Texian artillerists to fire on the soldados entering from the north wall. After taking the cannon, Morales' men moved through the lunette and the south gate area to clear out the defenders who were manning those posts. With the soldados pouring over the north wall and Morales' men at the south, both firing into the plaza at Texians, friendly fire was inevitable, and many soldados were victims of fratricide. the Texians retreated to their second line of defense, the long barrack and the church. During the siege, they had knocked loopholes in the 3-foot-thick long barrack walls to fire through should the need ever arise. When the need arose, they used those loopholes quite effectively. The Texians had no time to spike the cannons before retreating to the long barrack, so the soldados just turned those guns on the long barrack, bombarding the doors and the walls, while the Texians fired on them through the loopholes. Once they created a point of ingress, the Mexicans charged in. Greeted by Texian fire, some soldados hesitated, only to be trampled by the soldiers immediately behind them. The fighting now moved room to room through the long barrack. Sergeant Becerra said that the Texians fought like devils. It was short range, muzzle to muzzle, hand to hand, musket and rifle, bayonet and bowie knife. The Texians defended desperately every inch of the fort. The sun was now creeping up on the horizon of March 6th. As the last surviving defenders fought for their lives in the long barrack, Mexican soldiers went to work on the church. As Sergeant Felix Nunez of the 1st Column described the scene, the courtyard, the doors, the windows, roof, and all around the doomed Alamo became one reeking mass of armed humanity. In the sacristy of the church, Susanna Dickinson, her baby, along with the Navarro sisters, Mrs. Esparza and her children, and the kids of a few other defenders, listened as the Texians defended from the walls. They listened as the walls were compromised. They listened as the captured artillery pieces pummeled the long barrack, and soon they'd listen as the soldados entered the church and began firing into the darkened rooms near them. The church had no door, but during the siege, the Texians had barricaded the opening. As the Mexican troops breached that barricade, they were met with a long ramp that rose about 12 feet up to the church's high battery. One of the cannons on that battery was loaded up with bits of metal, old rusty door hinges, nails, chunks of horseshoes that basically turned the cannon into a huge shotgun. And that gun was wheeled around and fired on the first wave of soldados who entered the church. Very effective. But as the Texians reloaded, another wave of soldados entered and fired a volley on them, equally effective, then charged up the ramp and finished their work with bayonets. Then they began moving through the darkened rooms of the Alamo church. Remember Sesma's cavalry lancers posted out here by the Alameda to scout and rout any escapees from the Alamo? Right about now, they were earning their keep. A small number of Texians who survived the bulk of the fighting were hemmed in around here near the palisade between the church and the low barrack. This was Crockett's area. It's believed that some of them tried to make a run for the Gonzales Road, and some accounts point to additional breakouts via the south gate and the back of the church. Mexican accounts of the battle vary on how many were intercepted by the Lancers, from 10 or 11 to 60. Several eyewitness accounts recalled one defender atop the walls with his young son in his arms. One account says that they jumped to their death. Another account says they were shot down before they were able to. Enrique Esparza later recalled that as the Mexicans cleared the darkened rooms of the church, they fired into the sacristy where he took shelter with the women and the other children. One child, probably a boy of 10 or 11 years, was shot before the soldados heard the shouts and screams of the women inside. Not 90 minutes had elapsed since the columns first mobilized and the deguello sounded. Now the firing had ceased. The sun had risen on March 6th. One Mexican officer estimated that 50,000 cartridges had been expended in that short span of time. Enter Santa Anna, stage right. As His Excellency surveyed the scene, General Castrillon presented him with a handful of Texians who had survived the fighting. Because they made it out of the desperate fight alive, Castrillon recommended their lives be spared. Santa Anna signaled his disgust with any such idea, and their lives were terminated. Earlier in this series, we talked about Travis's line in the sand. The Alamo story is full of known unknowns, and that's one of them. Now we'll talk about two more known unknowns. The most famous Alamo defender decedents, David Crockett and James Bowie. It has been, still is, and perhaps always will be the subject of much debate as to whether Crockett was among the men who survived the battle and were executed after the fact. He was, after all, the most famous man in the place and had a public persona of a frontiersman and a fighter. Non-combatant accounts place Crockett's body in various locations in the Alamo compound, and some Mexican accounts do too. Some accounts have him swinging his rifle to the very end, finally succumbing to a veritable porcupine of Mexican bayonets. Others have him among the men who were executed. Less fuss is made over the death of the second most famous man in the Alamo, James Bowie. This is probably because we know he was deathly ill and not engaged in the fight. Nonetheless, opinions vary. One account has him dying of his respiratory malady before the assault even began. Other accounts can't agree on the number of dead Mexican soldiers piled around his sickbed, or whether they were slain with his pistol, his famous blade, or both. Other lore says Bowie shot himself. Like the line in the sand, I am agnostic on this subject. Whether Crockett went down swinging or survived the battle only to be executed, whether Bowie fought from his bed or was too ill to move, the net result is the same. David Crockett and Jim Bowie died at the Alamo on March 6, 1836. To me, the choice to stay and fight, eclipses everything else. The dead, hundreds of them, between 180 and 250 Texians and about 600 Mexicans, inside and outside the walls. Residents of San Antonio later recalled that some areas of the Alamo compound were literally carpeted with bodies, and the floor of the church was crimson with the sticky blood of the slain. Santa Anna called upon the alcalde of San Antonio, Francisco Ruiz, to gather up some citizens and carts to deal with the corpse problem. He wanted the bodies of the soldados moved to the Campo Santo, the cemetery, for burial. But according to Felix Nunez, when the operation commenced, some men couldn't be identified by uniform or the color of their skin. Their uniforms and clothes were so stained with blood and smoke, and their faces so besmeared with gore and blackened, that one could not distinguish one from the other. Santa Anna reportedly had the faces of the dead wiped clean when identification was a problem. According to Alcalde Ruiz, he ran out of Campo Santo real estate to bury the dead Mexican soldiers, so some of them were thrown into the river. But the bodies didn't go willingly with the flow. Some eyewitnesses described a macabre bottleneck in the bend of the river that had to be cleared days later. Had Santa Anna been dragging up and leaving San Antonio, he may well have just left the dead Texians where they fell. But he wasn't going anywhere just yet, so he couldn't rely on coyotes and vultures and microbes to act as undertakers. Being in close proximity to decomposing bodies for the next few weeks just wouldn't do. And besides, burials, even in mass graves, wouldn't send the same message to the Texians. So Mexican soldiers and citizens of Bear were sent out to gather wood. Lots of wood. After the bodies were stripped of any valuables, they were dragged to one of three areas believed to be here and here on either side of the Alameda. Even now, I'm watching them burn to free us from their putrefaction, wrote one Mexican officer from the Alamo. All of the defenders were heaped onto the funeral pyres except for one, Gregorio Esparza, whose family rode out the siege and battle in the sacristy, had a brother in Santa Anna's army who hadn't taken part in the siege and battle. Francisco Esparza later attested that he located Gregorio's body and that he was permitted to bury it in the Campo Santo. The women and surviving children were sent on Santa Anna's orders to the home of Ramon Musquiz. Enrique Esparza said that when they got there, they were all famished. They hadn't eaten anything since the 5th. The servants of the Musquiz family served them coffee and tamales, and they finally got some rest. The following day, the women were taken before Santa Anna. Each was interviewed individually, then given $2 silver and a blanket. As the ashes of the defenders smoldered, Susanna Dickinson began her journey to Gonzales with her baby, $2, a blanket, and a message from Santa Anna that what happened at the Alamo would be repeated anywhere the Texians chose to engage with the Mexican army. Along the Gonzales Road, she met Travis's body servant, Joe, whose life had also been spared. Together, they reported the news of annihilation in San Antonio and told, for the first time, a last stand story, shared and remembered the whole world over.
And welcome back, everyone. Josh Green and Sterling Harris back on with you. And hey, what a video. Am I right, Sterling?
Oh my goodness. It's amazing. It really opens your eyes to that very last day. Siege of the Alamo there, just all the details about it. It seems to be a very accurate account of it. And that's what we're looking for.
Exactly there, Sterling. Again, you can view that video on texashistorytrust.org, or you can also check out another website that's kind of telling about what's happening around the Alamo, especially the Alamo Plaza. And Sterling's going to kind of talk about this as well here in just a little bit. But that website also is www.thealamo.org. It's going to when you go to it, you'll find the Alamo plan and kind of see what they're planning out around the Alamo Plaza. Well, going back and talking about the video, Sterling, what was your biggest take out of that?
Well, just the final days are just what a tremendous battle it was, and the Texans were basically really worn down for those days they've been there, and then here's that attack. I mean, total attack, from all sides, but they fought bravely. It was a tremendous, I mean, there was 182 to 254 that died there at the Alamo. And, the people like William Barrett Travis, David Crockett, Jim Bowie, those are the ones that you hear those names the most, but there was so many other names, Hispanics names in there too. All these folks were Texans. They were Texians. So it was a battle for independence from Mexico right there. That's where it all started.
And just amazing how long they were able to hold off. Again, they had a whole army surrounding them there, Sterling. And, as you said, there
Mm-hmm.
were about 180 to about 200 Texans. I believe the video said around 1,500 troops for the
Mm-hmm.
Mexican army at the time that surrounded
Mm-hmm.
the fort. And
Mm-hmm.
just the way that they were able to fight on, especially into that last day where, there had been besiegements or barrages of cannon fire that try to disrupt their sleep schedules and everything else going into that final day into the morning. Now, Sterling, I know both you and I have seen a lot of movies on the Alamo. Of course, the more recent one I can think of is the one with Billy Bob Thornton playing Davy Crockett, the Alamo. Also, the John
Mm-hmm.
Wayne one back in the '60s. Actually, the where it took place. Look, it was daylight when
Mm-hmm.
that final battle took place, but that's actually not the case. It actually took on in the late morning hours of March the
Mm-hmm.
6th.
And it was a total, only I think 15 people survived, and that was of course Miss Dickinson and her daughter, and then two slaves. I think Travis's slave Joe, and then Bowie's slave Ben were the only survivors that walked away from it. It was pretty much total devastation. Santa Ana, his order was to burn all the bodies. So they burned all the bodies, and they did not put a grave or anything. That's what. So it really stirred anger, and that happened. That was the battle cry, that finally ended up, at San Jacinto for the to defeat of Santa Ana. But anyway, it was just they could have left, and I think that was the orders actually for them to leave the Alamo and join back up with the rest of the Texans, but they decided to stay there and fight, and that actually gave Sam Houston more time to rally his troops, and that's how it ended. It was amazing and piece of history right there, and I think everybody needs to go see it, and I'm just hoping the interpretation is people like the Texas History Trust are really trying to make sure things are staying accurate. And I think that's the main thing for the if you really get in and do the study behind this famous battle.
No, absolutely there, Sterling. Again, as she explains, Michelle Haas is the one that narrates the video, and she explains, the different eyewitness accounts from, both sides. But it kind of correlates, as we were talking about earlier, Sterling, before we kind of
Mm-hmm.
started, it correlates that same truth, so to speak.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we could go on and on about it. It's just it's a wonderful. If I think I was a little kid the first time I went into the chapel, but it was just amazing to walk in there. You could just feel it. It's just unbelievable.
No, absolutely, Sterling. And one of the cool things that we talked about on a previous podcast that we did is that you actually, when you were working for the Texas General Land Office, y'all got to do some stuff and take over kind of the documents for the Alamo, and you actually got to hold the actual letter that Travis had written asking
Mm-hmm.
for more help and for reinforcements. And when you hold a piece of paper like that, Sterling, kind of what How did you feel just in that moment, getting to see that for the
Well,
first time?
well, it's a tremendous honor for them just to pull this out of the vault and be able to view it, and just to see that. I mean, it's amazing thing. I mean, as far as it's just so cool that Texas really is preserving their history, and taking care of these documents. That was always an impressive thing about the General Land Office, and our archives and records in our vault. All these old maps, all these documents, and there's so many, that and that one is definitely special. Was the Travis letter. It's a wonderful thing. I think it's a great place to take your kids, and educate them on Texas history, and that needs to be done. We're losing that. We really need our young people to understand, where this country, where Texas began. And after that, after the fall of Alamo and after winning the San Jacinto, it was 9 years as a republic, 1845. So it took a long time for us to be annexed into the United States, but it was a good thing. I think it was just some strong people there at this time, and it's such a really awesome thing.
No, absolutely, Sterling. And as you talk about the most important event in Texas history, and if those events had not had happened, even going in, we tie it to American history, things would be a lot different that we would probably see them today.
Oh, absolutely. You think all that it was annexed just over this battle over Texas winning independence from Mexico? That took in New Mexico and Colorado, the whole strip, all that, the western United States. It was basically, and that was because of that battle, that one. We were able to take over this land here, and annex it into the United States, which it's a wonderful thing that we've got to be able to see that happen, and what an awesome thing.
Yes, sir, Sterling. Well, we're just about out of time here on today's podcast. It's been one of the coolest ones because of, the topic that we have gotten to cover today. Also, for the folks, if you'd like to go back and watch the video, of course, you can go back and listen to the podcast, or also you can check out where the video was from, and that is from TexasHistoryTrust.org. There's plenty of other videos of Texas history on there as well. So please check out that website again, TexasHistoryTrust.org. Or you can also visit to kind of see what they're planning and doing around the Alamo and Alamo Plaza in San Antonio. That website is www.thealamo.org, and just view on there and look, and you'll see the Alamo plan, and you can see what they're doing there as well. So, Sterling, before we kind of sign it off today, anything you'd like to say before we cap off another one?
Josh, that probably wraps it up pretty well. This is a great opportunity today to be able to talk about this again. And I encourage folks to go visit the Alamo in San Antonio. What a wonderful city, and it's a wonderful trip to be able to go down there and visit. The hospitality is amazing in San Antonio. So yeah, go check it out. The Emily Morgan is an awesome hotel right there next to the Alamo. I've stayed there many times, and so it looks right down on the Alamo. So anyway, it's a wonderful place to go see.
Absolutely. Well, Sterling, again, I appreciate you being on with us today and providing us the information and the video from the website. Again, that website is TexasHistoryTrust.org, giving those people a plug and the work they're doing and preserving the history. And Sterling, again, it's always so cool to have you on when we get to talk about this. Again, me and you could probably go on forever and ever and ever about this, even though we don't have the time, so to speak, here on the podcast, and we'll get into it, I know when we get to see each other again, but in person. But Sterling, it's always awesome to have you on here. You always provide great topics in Texas history, and I will say this has probably been the most definite part of interesting Texas history, covering the most impactful part of history in the history of Texas in the Battle of the Alamo. So again, Sterling, thank you so much for joining us, man, and can't wait to have you on next time.
Thank you, Josh. We're so appreciated.
Once again, thank you all for tuning in today. This has been another edition of the BIS Podcast, broadcasting live on the Marvin Network. For Sterling Harris, I'm Josh Green. Until next time, so long and goodbye.